Hello. This is John Alexis Guerra Gomez with Northeastern University's Web Development online course, and this is week 8. And this week we are going to start talking a little bit about React. So I hope by now you have all learned and worked on the tutorial for creating applications with React, the tic-tac-toe tutorial. It is very important. Also, other interesting materials for reading that you should take a look at are all about thinking in React, all of the elements in here. And then as well as all of these, if you want to go into the more advanced ones, these are extremely important, okay? However, for a first understanding of the tool, I like trying to explain what is the thing that we do when we actually work with React. So we do have the typical architecture that we have been using in here. And then basically the main difference that we are going to have is that we are going to have something like this. Let's try to put it out here. This is going to be our foreign one, but then instead of having a static front end or a static like JavaScript front end, we are going to have a static front React application, also called SPA. Excuse me, single page application. And then the main thing that is going to happen is that we are going to be serving our files in here. But these files that you serve in here or that we serve in here, if I can select them, it seems like it doesn't want me to, are not going to be like static JavaScript anymore. Instead, they are going to be just React files. And then we are going to have like an extra step in here that we can say it's going to be our, excuse me, React interpreter. Or have a specific name for it. It's like a div parser and stuff, but then actually you can have this, something like this. And then the whole idea is that this one is going to be processing things directly in the browser, and that's why it's called client-side rendered. And then as well, let's go and say in here that the file we are going to be sending, it's actually in React form, okay? So in order for us to understand that, one thing I like doing, they just released a new version, we are in version 19, but one thing I like doing, it's like just showing how things are happening underneath it all, okay? So for that, it is very important that you follow all the steps in this. We are not going to be using TypeScript for the class, but I recommend you to take a look at it for future, as it's being used a lot. And then you can, if you come here into the setup, you can see that we have the default, or actually in the installation. And this is going to explain how you can create it. So here is a very basic demo of the things that we could do, and then how to get started. So we are going to be working whenever we are doing our applications using this build React app from scratch. But before we do that, let's try to say how we could add like React to an existing project. So for this one, basically what I recommend us is that you can create one of these three options. So we could use one of the frameworks, which is what we're going to be using later. Or you can set up some same app as one of the Next.js or Gatsby. We're not going to do that. So let's try doing this one. So what if we just create like a server, like the Node Express server that we have been creating, like this one, and then in the static folder is where we are going to put our app, okay? So that gives us something. But then we also are going to need to work around this JSX syntax. So, and then for that, we are going to start creating our application. So to get started, let me come in here. Hopefully everything is working correctly. So I have here my terminal, and then what I'm going to do is just to create like a Scratch2 project, and then into that project, going to open Visual Studio Code, and then of course I selected the wrong one. Here I'm going to create a new file. Let me call it index.html, and then just go and create our basic application and say hola React. Okay, So if we then go and just initialize this using what we already know, like initialize it as a JavaScript project, npm init, so that is going to create our package JSON. And let's get Copilot out of the way here. We can go and say that this is going to be my team modules. Let's also say that we are going to be using type modules. So we can use ES6, although it might not even be necessary here. And then I have this basic application, and then I can just go and reload as my web server, okay? Which is actually telling me that I already have another one running, so let me stop that and then restart it, and then we have our application. So far, it's basically what we have been doing in the rest of the class, okay? So now let's start creating our very first React application. So for that, one thing I could do is that I just go and then enable create a script. And then, as you can see, this is trying to import from those elements. But then instead of doing that, let's actually try to set it up completely from scratch. So let me see if I can find, because they change the order every time. So we are going to need to install these ones. This is if you want to run it locally, or where is the file? Many integrations. This is what we are going to do next. Behind the scenes, best practices. I am not finding the URL, I think. What about here? Thinking in React? No. Create React app. Building from scratch. Make this a little bit smaller and see if I can find it from there. Build common applications. No. That's something else. Get started with a framework. Nope. So, here. This try React. I think it's one of the ones. Yes, this is it. So basically, it was here again in the starting from an existing project, and then we do have this try React. And as I say, they keep on changing this all the time. And then basically they have this example, which is the most basic one, and this is the one we are going to be using. So we are not even going to install the packages directly or like load them directly. Instead, what we are doing is that we're going to be loading them from onPackage, okay? And then when we do that, let me go and create my function that says my component. Let's actually call it greeter. Creator. Oh my god. And then basically, let me shut up this for a second, although I might need it later. So, but basically in this thing, what I'm going to do is just return like hola mundo, hola John, or something like that, okay? So in order for this to work, the way React works is that it wants you to have like a target or something where you're going to be rendering. And then we can go and say that target, it's going to be our classical get element by ID. And then since I selected this target ID in here, I can just go and do this in here, okay? Then, if I am not mistaken, one of the things we are going to need to do is to just use the React DOM library, which is one of the libraries that we imported in here, as you can see in here, which actually has a function that says that I can pass an HTML element, and that is going to get me kind of like a wrapper of that HTML element into something that I can render, okay? And then finally, what I need to do is just say, I'm going to render, and what is the element I want to render. So if I am not mistaken, it should be something like this, fingers crossed, and then I tell it what is the name of my attribute, okay? So this is kind of like my most basic component, this one in here. And then what this one is doing is that it's wrapping again that component and it's going to be rendering it. So basically React, one of the things it needs to do, it's kind of like take my HTML elements and then render them, like, or wrap them with something so they can add extra information. And the cool thing about this is that I can start creating like larger applications or start creating like bigger things in there. Like for instance, like what happens if I want to make this, I don't know, like another header. So if I try to do that, then you can see that it's actually just going to be rendering like this. But we do have this React create element. So what if we actually take this one and then put it in here as a function? Oh, and by the way, if you search, for instance, for React create root, probably this is not in the MDN, but then here is the documentation. This is the documentation of that specific function. So these are the client APIs that we are using. And then they explain to you how you can actually use them. We should also try to see if we can load this locally like that. But yeah, anyhow, we could also import it from the other one. Okay, so yeah, if we do type module, yeah, but I need to do something else later. Okay, the other one that we can also find, and this is the API documentation, is the create element. And then this one seems like older version, so React, let's try if we can get the other one, or I wonder if they deprecated that. React DOM APIs, okay, so this is the create element. Yeah, it's still called legacy. Interesting. In any case, so the create element will take 3 parameters: the type of element you want to create, what props you want to pass, and what are the children that that's going to have. So now I have my create element, and then if I do this, then it's still doing that. But then what I'm going to do is that I'm going to take usage of that function. And then remember, like, I am not calling the function in here, I'm just passing it to this other element. And then what I'm going to say is that this is going to be an h2. Okay, for the moment I'm not going to pass any props, and I am going to talk about those in a second. And then since that is going to be wrapped into an element, then it should be something like this, you see? So the cool thing about that is that you can also go and say things like, I don't know, like for instance, I'm going to put that into an UL, and then if I want to create a list item, then I need to do like something like this, and then again null, and then just do that, and that will create like one element. Okay, I think I saw that it says that it can accept multiple props, and I saw it with a spread attribute. Alexis, so if I do that, then it actually works. Yeah, and then that's okay. So basically what this is doing is that it's calling this function that, again, it's taking like a wrapper around like an HTML element, creates a new HTML element, which is going to be called a React component, that it's an HTML element like under steroids or with extra superpowers that contains all the information that React needs, because like React is going actually to have like a div engine that makes sure that only the certain parts that need to be re-rendered are changed. Okay, now you can also pass props to that, and those props are going to be useful, for instance, just for changing attributes for that. So for instance, I could go and say in here that this is going to be, and then Copilot just woke up, shoot it up again. Basically I could go and say something here or there, and then if you inspect this, and this is kind of like the reason why we are doing all of this from scratch, is that I want you to see that basically what's happening is that React is just transforming the code that you have in here. For the moment, actually, this is not even transforming anything. This is just rendering, and it's just standard JavaScript. And then it's using like those props for dynamically modifying the DOM and showing what you want. So basically very similar to what we did in the previous projects using Ajax, but then now it is going to be like adding some extra information that makes things supposedly better, okay, if you do things the correct React way. So that's why like looking at all of these tutorials, it is very important so you learn how to do things the React way. Okay, now let me stop in there for this one, and then what we are going to do in the next video is that I'm going to switch this into JSX format.